All right, so we'll get started. It's our March meeting here. And I hope to mention this a couple times, but we plan on this being our last virtual meeting. So spread the word. We're going to be in person in April at the Pittsburgh Community Center. So hopefully we can continue with that, health permitting. So, all right. These are obviously just our officers and board of directors here. We've been putting in a lot of work the past couple of months to try to get the film festival rolling. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So that's up and going. We're going to have a film festival on the 9th. So these people have been putting in a lot of work. So if you see them, thank them, especially Kate. Jesse's been putting in a lot of work as well for that, even though he's not on here, Jesse Hollenbeck. So, all right. So fishing reports. Dave, you said that things are going all right on the tribs?
Yeah, Lake Ontario has a very unique situation with Sandy Creek. It truly is a drop back brown trout fishery. I don't know if those fish stay in Sandy Creek because the ice that, ends up clogging the thing up in the wintertime. But there's a lot of big brown trout dropping out of there. I got some the other day. And then we're starting to see, again, our pen-reared fish show up at Oak Orchard. Caught some nice fish today. They're starting to show up. They're not on gravel yet. The water's still around 38 degrees. They won't get on gravel until it gets a little warmer. But so those two streams are fishing well. The Salmon River has got plenty of steelhead, but the water's pretty high. There's a lot of snow up in the Tug Hill still, so that water is going to be going up and down. It's very cold. And then the streams out east of Rochester have got fish in them. Lindsay caught a nice brown out at Maxwell Creek last week. And we've seen fish in Mill Creek and 4 Mile and all of those streams all have some fish in them. The Genesee River, I'm sure, has a whole bunch of steelhead in it if you could get at it. But right now it's about 8,000 cubic feet per second. So you don't want to go near that. It's about 100 on the turbidity meter. But out west, the stream, Johnson Creek is fishing really well too. For those of you who are familiar with Johnson, that's a really nice stream. 18 Mile, I'm sure, has steelhead, but where most of the folks around here go, Oak Orchard and Sandy Creek, they're both fishing very well.
Great. Yeah, I've been on Oweka and Spring Creek a little bit, and the water's been pretty high in Oweka. Hasn't been a whole lot going on there. There's been, some success in Spring Creek, but I am hearing reports from some different people who spend a lot of time out there that they're concerned the mergangers may have had a pretty serious impact again this winter. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming months, how the population looks. So anyone else? No? All right. Well, things should be picking up here for both realms, inland and tributaries. So get out there, make it happen. All right, our financial report is actually a repeat of February. We just kind of had some time constraints with our March meeting. So that's about what we still have, about $18,000 in checking, 5,000 in plus in conservation, and 50 in petty cash. So, we said to stay tuned about tree planting opportunities with the Oweka Creek Watershed Committee. So we're still looking to hear on some dates for that. And again, we did get another $500 grant via Lisa and the State Council for the mayfly system. So we're excited to put some more mayfly systems in. We're in conversation with the Watershed Committee and some other people to figure out where those might best be located. Anything else, Cal?
Nothing for me, thanks.
Okay. All right, and Dave, you wanted a couple of minutes to talk about the rearing pens.
Yeah, so we've been working with the DEC. We're getting all new nets for the pens this year, some top nets and some structure nets. They're supposed to arrive on March 21st out to Orleans, the tackle shop out in Orleans County. And so tentatively right now, we've got Saturday, March 26th as the work day to put the pens up at 10 a.m. at Lake Breeze Marina. I will I've got email addresses for about 12 people who wanted to volunteer. I don't have phone numbers for everybody. I don't know if Ed DiGiorio's on, John Jerbeck, Chris I'm sorry if I butchered your names, Chris Schleif, and then Chris and Micah Pollock. If you guys are on, you want to send me your phone numbers, but I'll send an email out this week giving you the dates, and then I'll confirm once we make sure we get the nets on the 21st. We also have to work with the marina to get the pens down. They're all stacked up behind one of their buildings. And we're working with talking to the marina to get them down by the 26th. Because we'll likely get our fish the first week of April. And as soon as I get a date for the fish delivery, then I'll let people know if you want to come out and be a part of that. It's a pretty neat thing. They bring about 112,000 Chinooks and 10,000 steelhead out there to put in the pens. And and we can use some extra hands. So, and it'll likely be a day during the week. The DEC doesn't want to pay for their technicians to work on a weekend, likely. So, so that's the update. Right now, tentatively, March 26th will be our work day at 10 o'clock. I will send it out an email, this week, with those dates, tentative dates. And then, of course, I'll follow up as soon as I can lock them in for sure. But that's what we're looking to do.
Okay. Does 12 people, does that seem doable to you, Dave, or do we need it?
Yeah, no, that's very good. I mean, if we get 12, because Ron will have some people showing up. There's a couple other people that I know will be out there that aren't on my list that just have been doing it forever. So we'll have probably 15 people. With 15 people, we can get 2 pens done in an hour.
Great.
And if you come out to do that, bring your fishing gear because there's steelhead in that river.
Great. All right. And with the youth, again, let people know if you know a 14 to 17-year-old that is interested in going to the fishing camp put on down on the Delaware River. We are going to offer a scholarship to one of those campers if they decide to apply through Seth Green, and the board will meet and kind of discuss and choose from the application a scholarship recipient. And at some point, we're actually hoping to hear from this year as well, one of the previous recipients, and he'll talk to us about that opportunity and what it meant to him and kind of what it did for him. So I don't know if Chuck's on, but if you are, Chuck, do you have anything else to add?
Nothing more to add. I'm still trying to get in touch with Peter Romig, who was our winner in 2019, but he's been on spring break.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll hear from him at some point. As far as trout in the classroom goes, that's still going well. Our fish are really healthy this year. We haven't had any deaths in, I think, over a month, other than the fish eating each other. So we'll probably release those in April, and we might have a video to share of that as well. So the kids are excited watching them grow and learning about them and taking care of fish. So they've also got another tank that has some scuds growing in it, so they're kind of getting a little bit of the full life cycle. So that's nice for them. All right, so upcoming meetings and events. We've got the Fly Fishing Film Tour. All right, that's going to be on the 9th at the Little Theater, and it's going to be a smorgasbord of a whole bunch of fishing videos that are pretty amazing every year, from saltwater to freshwater, almost every type of species. It's just a good time. It's a great time. So if you've not yet bought a ticket, buy a ticket. It will prove to be a good time. There's going to be a beer tasting there. We actually have a beer that's being made on behalf of Trout Unlimited. It's kind of a fundraising opportunity. And we also are going to have a lot of items up for raffle. The premier raffle this year is going to be a Recon outfit. That's about $1,000 item. And then the second place prize is a $500 Orvis gift card. So that's just the premier raffle. We do have some other raffles that will be happening as well. There's a gift certificate to the Tailwater Lodge. There's a Yeti Outload box, which I believe is a huge cooler. There's a Costa sunglasses, a Sims waterproof bag, a half-day guided trip with Jay Greenway, some assorted clothing, articles and things of that nature, some art potentially, and we got some hand-tied flies from Micah, Chris's son, excuse me. And we've got hand-tied flies from Carl Palmer. We've got hand-tied flies from Gary Rose. You probably recognize some of those names. Carl Palmer is a pretty big name in the local fishing area. And Gary Rose used to live in the area, and he's sent us a really solid assortment of flies that, from the looks of them, they'll be pretty amazing on Spring Creek. Gary was kind of a master over at Spring Creek, and he's a great fly tyer as well. So, and we've also got another rod from Reddington. So we got all sorts of things, probably more things coming in still that we're going to be raffling off. So get a ticket, come to the raffle, just have a good time, watch the movie, and just have a night out, relax, and maybe you'll go home with some pretty nice stuff as well. So, all right, our April meeting again is going to be in person. We're going to be at the Pittsburgh Community Center. We're going to be using kind of their large space there. So at some point we will hopefully be going back to Orvis when the time is appropriate for that. But for the time being, we're going to meet at the Pittsburgh Community Center. And in April, we're going to welcome Freddie Gluck. He made a film on the Owaka Creek habitat restoration. It's just kind of a 8-9 minute film. And he's going to, let us have a viewing of that and talk about the making of it. And so there's a lot to go into that, and maybe we'll have a little celebration as well of a successful completed project. Although we've done that before, I think it's a pretty amazing thing that the chapter did, and we want to kind of be mindful of what we're capable of when we really put our minds to it. So. Anything else to add from anyone on either that April meeting or the film festival? No? What was that? Okay. Well, tonight's meeting, we have Chris Murphy, president of Trout Power. Trout Power seeks to identify, map, monitor, and advocate, excuse me, for the protection of wild and genetically unique brook trout populations in the Adirondacks and wherever they're found throughout New York. So Trout Power wields the power of citizen science to find and protect wild brook trout. Chris has an extensive knowledge of brook trout in New York. Tonight, he is talking about, sorry, I've got a kid crying in the background, about Trout Power, finding and identifying genetically unique trout in a stocked and hybridized world. And Chris is a science teacher in Vermont, and he's got a lot to offer us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it, Kyle. Thanks. Thanks for having me, everyone. And I like the introduction of a kid crying in the background. Because being a high school science teacher, that's almost something I'm used to at this point. So that's a nice little transition there. But thanks everyone for having me. Like Kyle said, my name's Chris Murphy, and I'm the current president of Trout Power, which I'll kind of show a little presentation on in a moment. Like Kyle said, I'm a high school science teacher way up in Vermont. I'm actually up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, quite literally sitting 2 miles away from the Canadian border. So hearing all these stories of fishing and large steelhead and brown trout are making me very jealous, because the only water that I'm seeing right now is completely and totally frozen. So I'm quite envious and very excited for those times to return, where and I think tomorrow it's going to start the process, because it'll be quite warm up here. But so again, thank you so much for having me. What I'd love to do today is just kind of go through and tell you about our organization. We're a pretty recent organization who's still kind of in its infancy, only about 5, going on its 6th year. Obviously 2 of those years being a little hamstrung due to the pandemic, but just kind of tell you about, who we are, what we do, how we do it, and kind of I guess if there's a little bit of uniqueness to what we do, and sharing that with everyone as well. So I talked to Kyle and Chris beforehand. Obviously, if anyone has any questions, I certainly invite you to chime in the chat. I'll hopefully see it. If I don't, then Chris or Kyle, feel free to interrupt me and let me know what the question is. Or if people want to save questions to the end, I'm happy to answer those questions to the best of my ability. So so thanks again for the introduction. I'm not sure if I'm an expert on brook trout, but I'll take it and I'll run with it until I prove otherwise. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and we will go right into a little presentation here. So all right, here we go. I'm hoping that everyone can see that there. So
Yep, looks good.
basically, what we're going to do is, like I said, I'll take you kind of through Trout Power in a little bit, and Kyle gave a great introduction about what we are and what we're really doing. Like I said, I am the current president. I took over as the president of this organization 2 years ago, and formerly the president and founder was Jordan Ross, who is a fly rod builder down in the Utica area of New York. So I've been a part of this organization for years, and like I said, taken over the leadership role a few years ago. When we kind of created a mission statement for Trout Power, I love the mission statements that are very wordy and sound very scientific and complex. So our mission statement as a 501c3 is, as Kyle mentioned, enlisting the power of anglers to protect, restore, and enhance heritage brook trout populations and their habitats across their native range, using citizen science, advocacy, and stewardship. That's kind of really what our focus is, and I'm going to do my best to break that down and explain, what that means and what it looks like for us and how we go about that. So starting off, what we actually do as a nonprofit organization is that we are, first off, all volunteers. We have no paid, members. No, we have a board, but we are all volunteers. And we are all what we claim, and call ourselves as citizen scientists, which I'll explain in a moment. We take a part and have taken part in a variety of different projects. We have our own solo projects going on. We work with other groups and organizations such as Trout Unlimited chapters, such as the DEC. And then in terms of our genetic work that we do, we have worked with and are currently working with a number of different universities, including Michigan State, University of Albany, the University of Central Florida, as well as Cornell University. And each one of those universities kind of has a certain place within our sequence when we do our genetic work. So kind of branching off just for a moment, explaining that term citizen science. That's a term that some may be very familiar with. Some may not be. I'm sure many, especially hearing that conversation before about some conservation work, I think many of us probably are citizen science maybe without knowing it. But when we say that we're an organization based on citizen science, we're talking about a form of research that is really conducted either in whole or just in part by amateur scientists. So for us in Trout Power, our field work and our field sampling is done, again, by volunteers. And then for our genetic work, we turn that over to professionals at universities who do that for us. So we are, very much working as volunteers, but also, like I said, volunteer fishermen scientists. So as a passionate fly fisherman and a science teacher, it's a wonderful combination of my two biggest passions. So that image there is from a few years ago, pre-COVID, a nice gathering that we had for one of our Trout Power missions that I'll discuss a little bit later. So when we look at citizen science, as we've seen this, we've been doing our citizen science projects really since about 2016. And since that time, we've really seen a number of advantages of it, especially as we work with organizations like Trout Unlimited or when we're doing projects in conjunction with the DEC. One thing that's fantastic about it is that, again, we're all volunteers, so it's very economical. I've been amazed and continue to be amazed every year by the amount of passion that we see in our volunteers who come and support our cause. And because of that passion, we have an ability to, cover a pretty good amount of ground and get some pretty large amount of data in a pretty quick amount of time. Most of our events are usually weekends. They're not usually longer than 2 or 3 fishing days. And we have the ability to, because again, of our volunteers, cover, a substantial amount of area. And again, I'll explain what I mean when I say that in a few minutes. And then 2 other things is it's really fantastic. It's a great way to educate and connect the public, whether they're, hearing about Trout Power like, we are today, or whether they're involved in one of our events. It's a cause that I know I immediately, felt a really strong connection to, spending a lot of my life in the Adirondacks. And and last but certainly not least, it's fun. It's fishing with a little bit of a side story to it. So we've been able to take that angle of using volunteer citizen scientists and do some pretty neat stuff with it that we're continuing to try to grow and evolve over time. So looking at what we've kind of done so far, there's really three major categories, and one that really is kind of our focus, or as we say, our bread and butter. But the three major things that we've done is that we've done a few presence, non-presence studies in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Conservation, which I'll describe in a moment. Our bread and butter is doing genetic analysis, searching for genetically unique strains. And it's something that we've really started, ironically, just started in the fall of 2019, which was excellent timing by us, is some long-term monitoring studies of certain watersheds, which I'll describe at the end of the presentation. So what I'd like to do is just kind of explain each one of these, not only what they are, but again, how they do it, because I think that how we do it is at least the feedback we've received from other TU chapters or other organizations that we've worked with or shown what we do to is kind of unique in how we actually do this. So first off, the one thing that we have done, and this is something we've only done a few of, we're actually about to start a rather large project with the New York State DEC on presence, non-presence studies. And how these work is that these are usually per the request of the DEC. They give us a set of designated streams, and what they ask us to do is they ask us to go in, fish these designated streams, first off to just see if there are fish or no fish. There could be a number of reasons for this. Some of these have been whether it's land acquisition that they want to sample. We'll go in there and do that for them. Whether it's habitat improvement projects, so we can go in and get a preview sample to see if there's a presence, maybe upstream of a certain area where they're doing habitat work, and trying to help them with understanding where the fish actually are. So we go in and we fish the streams that they designate to us. We log what we catch and where we catch it. We all are trained by the DEC previous to this. So we go by their protocols, we fill out their forms and their paperwork, marking any impassable barriers. That's obviously important in terms of, monitoring fish movements. And then also they ask us, any findings that we see, old roads that we recognize, landmarks, old ruins, that they can kind of get, especially with new land areas. So we're kind of almost in a way, we're kind of a recon team for them. If we go into streams and we find fish, that's a big success for us and also for the DEC. The reason for that is that if we don't find fish within a stream, then they will send a crew in where they can go in and really electroshock to confirm the lack of fish presence. So that's one thing that we've done. And like I said, we're about to do a pretty major project with them starting this year. One example, just to kind of exemplify the study a little bit, is that our first one that we did with the DEC was in the May of 2018. We explored and sampled an area called the Silver Lake Wilderness Area, which is, it's in the southern Adirondacks. It's really not too far from kind of the Utica, New Hartford area. And it was some land that the DEC had acquired over time, but really didn't have a lot of knowledge about in terms of, fish populations. And there were some streams that were, way back from the one road that goes into that wilderness area. So if you look at the image here, this is actually a waterfall that we marked as a impassable barrier. The DEC has definitions for impassable barriers based on the species type. We are primarily a brook trout organization. So this was over that minimum required height. So we labeled this as a impassable barrier. And it's kind of cool because this waterfall was about 10 miles back off the nearest dirt road. So, way back there. And it was pretty exciting because we found fish in the pool right below it, as well as fish above it, which is rather exciting. So one thing that's advantageous for us is that when we do these presence, non-presence studies, we're also able to do our genetic sampling process as well, which I'll describe here in just a moment. So this is just an example of, so this is a map that we received from the DC and worked with them to identify what are the major streams. I apologize if it's not the easiest to see, but if you look at some of these various streams, you can see that they're numbered and they're identified. So we receive a map, we receive a list of streams that the DC wants us to sample. And then again, we go in and we go sample those streams. And like I said, we mark where we're catching fish or where we're not finding fish. And then they can follow up. So if you note the map here, there's kind of one road that comes in and then some primitive campsites. And then all of this is just some fantastic wilderness area that was really outstanding to explore. And actually surprising, maybe not surprisingly so, maybe to me being a northern Vermonter now, a tremendous amount of moose and bear sign, which was quite exciting. But so we were able to cover all of these streams with our volunteers in a weekend in spring of 2018. And then we went back in spring of 2019 and finished up our sampling. So again, looking at that expanse, looking at the number of streams, and again, we were fortunate enough to be able to go in and have access and then also fish those areas and cover it within 2 weekends. So that's one thing that we've done. We've, to be honest, we've only done a few of these. But again, this is something that now that we've shown the DC our ability to do these, I know that we're going to continue to do these in various areas, not only in the Adirondacks, but in surrounding areas also. So that's the first major thing that we do is we do these presence, non-presence studies. The big thing that Trout Power, I guess, is kind of carving a niche out for, if you will, is our ability and our role in doing genetic analysis. And like I previously mentioned, this is what we kind of hang our hat on, if you will. This is kind of our bread and butter. And so since 2016, our organization's primary focus has been, going in to various areas of the Adirondack Park, searching for and then trying to identify genetically unique strains of brook trout within the Adirondack Park. So, and if you, noting the pictures on the presentation, those are two brook trout, as I'm sure all of us know. If you notice the kind of the variation in color and kind of, again, especially the fish over here on the left where it's got almost, this is a genetically unique strain that we found in the kind of west central Adirondacks. And the fish are just this amazing kind of cobalt blue, violet color. And it's just tremendous. And then on the right side is a different genetically unique strain. And, again, you can see the differences in the color. And that's one of, I would say, probably the most striking difference that you can actually visualize is some of their variations. Now, this being a dramatic example to show the contrast, sometimes we don't see as much, but we have seen some strains that really, you can see the difference, from their genetics being expressed. So this being our bread and butter, I'm going to take a few moments to kind of explain how we do this, because this, I think, is kind of where the unique citizen science comes into play. As a quick aside, when we talk about genetically unique, again, I'm a science and biology and life science teacher, so this is something that I hope I don't bore you too much with, and I'll make it quick and painless, as I say to the students. What genetically unique means in our eyes is that we are finding fish that do not have any DNA or a very, very small amount of DNA from the 6 major hatchery strains that the DEC raises and then stocks within the Adirondacks. We use the word genetically unique. I think the term heritage strain is decently well known, especially in the Adirondack Park. Heritage strain is actually, this is a term that was kind of invented by the DEC at their own admission. Back in the 1980s, and it was really saying what it says above, which is that these are fish that have unique genetics, and those unique genetics could stem from one of 2 places. They could be from a population that has been isolated since the receding of our last glacial period 10,000 plus years ago, or they could be, hypothetically, it could be a strain that was stocked well over 100 years ago, maybe a private stocking, that population took hold and has, so those genetics don't line up with those of the DEC. However, most of our work has found, and most of our conjunction with the DC has found that it's probably the former, where we're finding populations that have been isolated in these remote streams and haven't been exposed to hatchery fish. So the exciting thing is that previous to Trout Power, there were, depending on who you ask, either 8 or 9 heritage strains that had been identified and accepted within the Adirondack Park. The sign to the left is a sign from a interactive center up in Tupper Lake called the Wild Center. It's a really fantastic interactive nature and environment center. And this is they have a tank adjoining it. And this shows you what they term the Adirondack 8. And we're pretty excited. We've talked to them about this, how since 2016, we have found that the Adirondack 8 is not the Adirondack 8, but it's actually a growing band, because we've identified a number of genetically unique strains within the Adirondack Park. So it's kind of an exciting thing to think that this is something that's disappearing and maybe starting to go away, and we're realizing that actually there are a lot of strains that we just haven't found or identified as being such. So how we actually do this is that we kind of developed a protocol that we call our fin clip protocol. So what we do is that we go into the field and we catch these brook trout using fly rod and reel and all barbless hooks. And then what we do is that when we get the fish to the net, we find that putting them in Ziploc bags, we all bring out these big, gallon Ziploc bags, and fill them with water, put the fish in there so the fish is able to be in the water. Obviously, we still try to expedite the process as quickly as we can. So once we have that fish, and we have that fish safely in a bag where it's comfortable and in the water, what we do is that we send all of our volunteers out with a fin clip kit, which I'll show you in a moment. One of the things in that kit is a lighter and a pair of scissors. So our volunteers, before and after they catch every fish, they burn for at least 5 seconds minimum. They burn the end of each blade of scissors to sterilize the scissors. Using those scissors, they cut a very, very small piece of the trout's tail off the tip of the tail. Our geneticist that we work with has told us multiple times that if you can see the piece of tissue, then it's big enough for me to get DNA. So we get very, very small samples where sometimes you're quite literally staring at the scissors. It's like, I think that's it. And then we put it in a vial that's full of 90% ethanol, and you can see the little thin clip drop down and in there. And we release every single fish that we catch. And once we release the fish, we log where we are in terms of the GPS coordinates. We log what the sample number is, or what our fin clip number is per our vials that we've sent out our volunteers. And then any general notes or observations of the fish, whether it's color, whether it's size. And then last but certainly not least, we re-sterilize those scissors. So between every fish, we're having 2 rounds of sterilization, really to ensure that we're not having any cross-contamination with our genetics. So this is what it looks like in terms of paper form, actually kind of going into the field. This is a little bit more of what it looks like. So the idea that, again, we catch the fish and put it in a bag. That's actually the gentleman smiling on the left. I'll kind of toot my own horn here. That's my father, who's a passionate volunteer and quite a good fly fisherman. And then again, clipping the fish, you can see kind of a highlighted image of that up in the top right corner of the screen, putting that into one of our numbered vials, logging where that fin clip was used. We use an app it's actually a hunting app. If any of you are explorers and like exploring the backcountry, this has been an app I've used for a long time. I personally am not a hunter, but it's a great app for exploring. It's called Onyx, ONX, and it's a great app because you can pre-download maps of areas that you may not have service in. And for Trout Power, most of the areas that we're going into don't have service. So it's a way that we can preload those maps and still have a way to, see where we are as we're moving. So this is a screenshot that I made of my phone showing, you can see we track where we go. And then every time we catch a fish, we mark it on that mapping system, which is really helpful. And then, like I said, every single fish that we catch, we do release. As a quick aside, one thing that was exciting for us is that last year we actually went back to do another sampling of a stream that we sampled about, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And we went back and we caught 2 or 3 fish that we looked at. And as we looked at them, we looked at them, we looked at the tip of their tail, and we thought we saw maybe just a tiny bit of tissue missing. And so we were able to kind of match up the genetics and recognize that that was a fish that we had caught before, a fish that we had sampled and taken a fin clip from, and using pictures, able to really show that this tissue, we've been told by scientists, told by our geneticists that the tissue was going to grow back. I still remember the first time I clipped a fish and I literally apologized to it. It was like, I'm sorry, I hope that didn't hurt. So it's very encouraging to see that that tissue does grow back and does regenerate. So we're releasing these fish, we're releasing them as healthy as we can. And we're happy to know that we're doing very little, harm to them, again, using barbless hooks and using those Ziploc bags. So when we send our volunteers out, we give them one of these fin clip kits. You can see just a picture of it over on your right side. Each one of those kits has a small pair of scissors. It has a lighter, and then again, has a number of vials that are preloaded with 90% ethanol. So when we get those samples, they can put them in the vials. When they return those vials back to me. I put them on ice and then eventually send them to Michigan State, where we actually do our extraction and our sequencing. Down below, we give each one of our volunteers one of these sheets where they can go through. Selfishly, it makes my life a lot easier. So it's kind of an exciting part at the end of our day where everyone sits down and sometimes, have some snacks, maybe a cocktail or two if it's to your liking, and goes through and fills out one of these sheets. And then we're able to have all of these vials with our GPS coordinates and any notes that were taken. So and then just as kind of a side note from procedural sense, obviously all of our volunteers were having signed waivers and making sure that we train them. I don't just give them a card and say, here's how you do it. We train them all in how we do the fin clip protocol, so we know that we're getting good data using these fin clip kits. So that's how we actually go in and do our field work. Now, once we have those samples, what we do is, I guess that's where, in terms of our citizen science, that's where our amateur level science really ends. What we do then is that we send our samples now to Michigan State University. We were previously sending them to University of Albany. We linked up within the past year with a woman by the name of Mariah Meeks. Mariah Meeks is one of the premier names in brook trout genetic research. And we got connected, and she's now doing all of our samples, which is fantastic. So they're extracted, they're sequenced at a separate facility, and then they're sent to Dr. Spencer Bruce, who is at University of Albany, who does all of our genetic analysis. And this is where, forgive me, this is where I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes of science. So if pardon the science teacher in me, but I basically just to kind of explain how our analysis is done, because the first 4 years of Trout Power, we used a process called microsatellite analysis. So this is the teacher synopsis of how that actually works. So what we do is that we take a fin clip, and then microsatellite analysis looks at DNA markers within the brook trout's genome. With these DNA markers, what we're able to do is we're able to look at population designations. We're able to look at mixing that may be happening between populations. And then we're also able to look at what we call the allelic frequency, or basically what is the range of genetics for brook trout, right? How many options do they have in their genes? Which, especially as we see our world and our climate change around us, the hypothesis would be is that the brook trout with the most options for genetics, or the highest amount of frequency, would probably be the ones who are going to be able to adapt and survive the best to our changing climate and our changing environment. So, as we enter, and are already in this phase of change, we see that as being something that could be and is potentially important for research and development of strategies of how to mitigate and combat the challenges that lie ahead for us. So using a quick example here, we kind of see two populations, population 1, population 2, and the hatchery populations. Looking at various letters, our DNA sequences have four bases, A, T, C, and G. So I'm just using 2 of those, being C and G. We can look at those sequences. And again, as I said, there are certain combinations of microsatellite sequences that are going to be distinct to certain populations. So if we look, for example, at population 1 and 2, we can compare that to the microsat analysis that we've already done for the 6 hatchery strains that are stocked within the Adirondack Park in New York State. So in this example, we run the genetic microsat for population 1, we run it for population 2. When we do that, we find that specific microsatellite markers within our hatchery fish that we've previously found and identified. We see that not within population 1, but within population 2. So now we see that this second fish is a hybrid between, a wild population, in this case, population 1, and that hatchery population. That is something that, to be honest, we actually received a little bit of pushback on at first. We had some people who were pretty adamant that wild fish and stocked fish were not going to breed and not going to hybridize. And our science and our analysis has actually shown that to be not to be the case, that we actually have found a number of populations where we have wild fish that are pretty genetically clean, as we would say, like a population 1 upstream in headwaters. And then as you move down, usually towards a lake that's been stocked, where you start to see that hybridization, and you see a higher level as you move down towards the lake that has been stocked. So the cool thing for us is, rather than looking at all of these A, T, C's, and G's, we're able to put it into these vertical bar graphs, as you see on the right side. And it gives just a much nicer visual to, what we're actually seeing. So that's kind of a quick explanation of how we use our analysis once we get the results back and look at it. So here's an example of some data that we've collected. Up at the top of your screen, you'll see the 6 major strains that are stocked within the Adirondack Park. So you have your domestic strain, you have the Temiskaming strain, we have the hybrid of a domestic and Temiskaming fish, and then the DC also stocks 3 different heritage strains that they have obviously brought in and reared and raised in hatcheries, that being the Windfall strain, the Little Tupper strain, and the Horn Lake strain as well. And again, noting that even though it is a heritage strain or genetically unique, there are some trace amounts, especially within the Windfall strain, there are going to be some trace amounts of, whether in this case it looks to be mainly Temiskaming strain. So we'll kind of look at, some of our data, but that's how we really do it, is we compare the fish that we catch to the strains that have been stocked by the DEC. As a quick side note, we're actually moving away from microsatellite. Genetics is a highly evolving, and obviously in the last few years evolving even more in terms of technology. We're moving to a sequencing technique called rad sequencing. And the reason for this is simply, it's newer. It has a much larger capability. We're going to be able to tell that if we catch 2 fish that are from the same parent individual, we'll be able to tell that from a fin clip from their tail. We'll be able to almost, making a family tree or a phylogenetic tree is probably a pipe dream. However, we're going to be able to get really detailed information, and we're also going to be able to start to see change in genetics from generation to generation using this technique. So we're really excited about it. Our samples right now are currently being analyzed using that technique. I actually just heard from University of Albany about 2 hours ago that they're almost done. So I would have loved to share that with you tonight, but we're excited about what this is going to open up for us in terms of new information. So before I kind of share our data and the studies that we've done, I just want to kind of give one quick little backstory that really shows something that I thought and still think is just so awesome and so unique in this world where, at least as a biology and environmental science teacher, we hear so much in the news about these species that we're losing or that are endangered. And, we obviously highlight and enjoy the success stories that we have in terms of conservation and restoration. And this is one of those. So I thought I just would share a quick synopsis of it with you. And this is actually highlighting our first genetic study that we did, which was in 2016 up in the Sagamore Lake watershed, which is in the central Adirondacks. And we've got a few key role players here. And this is kind of a neat story of history and present, past the Adirondacks. And we've got a few characters here that are going to be involved in the story. One being Dr. Arpad Gerster, who that's a picture of him in, I believe, 1897, up near Long Lake in the Adirondacks. He looks quite content after a day of fishing. J.P. Ross is in the middle there with quite a nice fish and some beautiful weather in the background. And he, again, was former president and founder of the organization. And then Sidney Whalen, who is an author and is going to become a role player in the story in probably a minute or two. So the starting point here is that, the starting point for our story is, I guess, about 10,000 years ago, where we see our last glaciers retreat and go north. We have all of this great geologic change where we see ocean and sea environments in New York and Vermont up in the Champlain Basin. And we see a great amount of change, but also we see the foundation for the lakes, rivers, and streams that we all fish and enjoy today. So fast forwarding many, many thousands of years, going to the late 1700s and mid 1800s, we have the introduction of the Industrial Revolution, which seems like a large pivot from talking about brook trout and genetics. However, it's directly tied into this. 1870, this is the 1900s, the Gilded Age. If you're familiar with the Adirondacks or the Adirondack history, that period in the Adirondacks really kind of made the Adirondacks almost like a playground, if you will, for some very high-level people in terms of finances and stature, coming up mainly from the New York City area. Including people like, for example, Alfred Vanderbilt, you see down in the bottom left, and coming up and staying at these absolutely beautiful, great camps and lodges, many of which were built by a gentleman named W.W. Durant. This is him here in the top right, coming down off of one of the, that's actually a small cabin for him, believe it or not. So an area that brought up a lot of people from New York City and from, different areas to enjoy the hunting and fishing of the Adirondacks. One of the gentlemen who came up during that period was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Arpad Gerster. Gerster was a doctor in New York City. He is actually, I didn't know this until I read books about him, he's actually a very celebrated physician who is known for doing a very high level of surgery for his time period. And one other thing that's very impressive about him is that he kept daily diaries of his pretty much entire adult life. And his most extravagant writings were about his summers spent in the Adirondacks. He would come to the Adirondacks in the spring for a fishing trip and open up his camp, would stay there for a month or two in the summer, and then return in the fall to close up the camp and button it down for winter. Gerster's favorite thing to do, by far, as he often wrote about, was to fly fish for brook trout in the Adirondacks. That was his absolute favorite thing to do. He would pack and go back into the woods either by himself or with his trusty guide, Charlie, and really enjoyed fishing. The reason this is important to us is that he kept really well-documented accounts of where he was fishing, sketches of the streams, sketches of the fish, sketches of areas that he was, and even rough maps of the ponds, lakes, and streams that he was fishing. So how this kind of ties in, flashing forward even further, and some of us may have heard this story before. It's certainly not the most exciting one, but I think I'll make it a little exciting. When we look at major areas of industry within the United States, and I'm sure most of us have seen this and known this and have lived in that area, knowing where most of you are from and reside in. Industry is fantastic. It's given us the ability to have some of the wonderful things and technology that we have. One of the unfortunate things is that as that industry releases toxins like sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide, we have our lovely jet streams, specifically our mid-latitude jet stream, that takes those pollutants. And if you look and compare this map to that map of the jet stream, you'll see that those toxins end up right in our lovely area of New York and the Adirondacks. So what this unfortunately leads to is acid precipitation and deposition, which has had a pretty startling effect on a number of species within the Adirondacks: amphibians, plant life, reptiles, as well as fish and brook trout. This is a graph that shows the pH measurements coming off of Whiteface Mountain up in Lake Placid from the year 2000 up until about 2017. And you can see that back even as recent as 2000, you have some remarkably acidic waters. You have some remarkably acidic precipitation. I've heard stories from people who've been fishing in their Adirondacks where, you know, they were getting values when they would sample the streams that were, you know, low 4 or even below, which now we're talking the acidity of, you know, table vinegar or more acidic than that. And again, looking at those numbers on the right side, this is, you know, to brook trout, this is not good. This is impeding both survival, mainly through the parts of, you know, hatchability of eggs and then actual alevin survival. So where this kind of turns around is that, as we see in this chart, we've seen this dilution. We've seen this, you know, thanks to things such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. You know, we've seen those pollution levels go down. We've seen those acid rain levels go down. And from that, we've started to see headlines such as a couple of these, where we're now finding or seeing brook trout that are in areas that were seemingly fishless or seemingly, you know, void of any sort of fish life. And now suddenly there are fish there. There was a very kind of well-documented example that happened in the fall of 2019 up in Lake Colden, which is up in the High Peak region of the Adirondacks, where there's a great book called Fly Fishing in the Adirondacks in the 1930s. And it documents Lake Colden as a absolutely wonderful trout fishery, not only in terms of quantity, but quality of brook trout. And up until recently, you could go up there and you would find quite the opposite. You would find no brook trout. However, recently, they have found, you know, someone called the DC and said, hey, I was camping up in Lake Colden and Avalanche Lake and I caught brook trout. So now we're starting to see that there are areas within the Adirondack Park where we thought were once void of life and may have been completely void of life, but now we're seeing these populations rebounding, which is just so exciting, especially to me who just loves fishing for brook trout. So the reason I give you this couple minutes of background is that this is what we saw happen within our first area that we studied, which is waters around Great Camp Sagamore. Great Camp Sagamore, like I said, is in the central Adirondacks. During the 1990s, our founder, J.P. Ross, had a fly shop in the New Hartford area, was guiding in the Adirondacks, did some guiding at the request of Great Camp Sagamore, and very quickly found that in terms of both macroinvertebrates and brook trout, the streams were desolate. You would flip over rocks, and he said you would see maybe 1 or 2 small caddis casings, no mayfly life, no stoneflies, just very, very little macroinvertebrate life, and thus, you know, no brook trout. So mid-2000s comes along, and, you know, whispers start to happen that around Sagamore and some of these streams, they're starting to see rises. One of our Trout Power board members, John Markey, still loves to tell this endearing story of walking with his wife along a stream near Mohegan Lake, which is in that region, and suddenly stopping and saying, I think that looked like a trout rise. And went back to his truck, drove back down to the fly shop, told people, a few people went up the next day, and lo and behold, they catch, albeit very small, catch brook trout where they had never, you know, seen them previous to that. So in 2012, where this story all comes together is that in 2012, JP reads the Gerster diaries. So Sidney Whalen, that gentleman I mentioned earlier, he actually received the diaries from Gerster's grandson, and was so enthralled and so interested with them that he scribed his diary journals from the Adirondacks from 1895 to 1898. Not to give him a plug here, because the books are actually a little bit difficult to find these days. If you are a fan of history, Adirondack history, these books are just really, really interesting to read. They're just a great account of that time period, what was going on, and they're really stunning. And again, a lot of fishing. So Jordan reads these books, and then suddenly it kind of hits them. Well, wait, this area that we've just suddenly seen these fish come back, or now, again, or maybe they're just showing themselves. These used to be outstanding fisheries. He's writing, there's one page in the book about 1896 where Gerster talks about fishing one pool within a brook trout stream. Unfortunately, Gerster was not a catch and release fisherman, which again, to each their own, where he discusses catching 30 brook trout within one pool, and he estimated those 30 brook trout weighing over a total of 20 pounds, which to a stream brook trout fisherman like me, quite literally makes my mouth water. So outstanding fisheries, and Jordan recognizes, okay, so maybe these fish have been here, and maybe they had to hide out from some of that acid rain, and maybe they're starting to come back. So 2016, Trout Power goes in and samples the area around Sagamore. And what we found is that although the fish were quite small, these are actually images from those missions in 2016, so certainly not catching 30 fish equaling 20 pounds. We found brook trout in almost every single stream that we went to and that we checked, which was just extraordinarily exciting to all of us. To make the piece even more exciting to all of us is that when we sent those samples to the University of Albany, Spencer called us and he said, hey, I think you guys have something here, which we knew we had something, we just didn't know what it was. So what we found is that, and looking at the images again, over on the left side, you see those 6 strains that I'd shown previously. And then here's the data that we have, again, showing those vertical bars. So each one of these bars are a separate fin clip. And what we saw is that while we did see some hybridization from our, again, either a domestic or Temiskaming strain, most likely probably a hybrid, all of this blue is showing a unique genetic signature that we haven't, identified. So we suddenly recognize, oh my goodness, not only are these fish coming back, but they are one of these genetically unique or heritage strain fish. So this was a major moment in our organization's history. This was kind of a launching point for us in saying, okay, so if we found this here in albeit some pretty remote areas, there has to be more of them. There's a lot more remote areas out there. There must be more. So in 2017, we actually moved downstream. We started moving from Sagamore down towards some lakes that we knew are stocked by the DC with domestic Temiskaming hybrid strains. And as you can see, as we move, so over on the right are the headwater fish that we caught in 2016. And then 2017, again, within the same watershed, but moving closer to lakes that have been stocked, you can now see the overwhelming amount of mixing. Now, we still see that light blue signature of those fish that we were catching in 2016 around Sagamore, but now we're seeing other strains start to really mix in with that, which was very interesting. And also note this pink coloration up here that, again, doesn't match up with any of our others. So suddenly we go, oh wait, now we're seeing a different signature that we hadn't seen before. So from that point, what we've done is that every year we've tried to go into a certain area, sample it with sound reasoning for going. We're not just kind of closing our eyes and pointing to a place on the map and say, here we go. We're doing a little bit of research. We're working with the DC to look at stocking records and try to, pinpoint these places. So in 2018, as I previously mentioned, we did that presence non-presence study of the Silver Lake Wilderness in the Southern Adirondacks. As we did that work for the DC, we also did our genetic testing, and what we found was, yet again, in this case over on the right side, represented by this light sky blue, we see another, unique signature. Depending on the stream, the further back that we went, for example, over here on the far right side and on the far left side, those are streams that are upwards of 15 miles off a dirt road. We are finding fish with very little hybridization and mixing. This stream right here, and pardon me, these bolden lines are separating various streams. And then when we fish streams that were very close to the road and very close to the Sacandag River, we saw a little bit more mixing, specifically of that little tupper strain. But again, another unique fish that had not been identified before. In 2018, we had a small group that went up and fished the very highest headwaters of the Ossawaskachi River. And yet again, we see here, we see this pig signature, we find another separate unique strain. So now we found within the first couple of years, we found 3, remembering that, you know, previously we only thought there were 8 or 9. So here we go, we found yet, identified another one. And then in 2019, and this may be of interest to the audience here, we did a collaboration with Trout Unlimited. And what I mean by collaboration is that Trout Unlimited, Trout Power went in and we trained Trout Unlimited volunteers in terms of our FinClip protocol. We explained the process, we explained what we do, how we do it, and the reason that we do it. And then they went up and sampled, their streams that they really like to fish up on Tug Hill. And what they found was, and again, looking at this kind of deep purple color, we found yet another genetically unique strain. And actually, and if you look, you can barely see any mixing. These are some of the cleanest genetic fish that we found. And not to give away the location, this middle portion right here, that stream is literally right next to a road. So to me, just to think that there's been this fish that is genetically unique, that hasn't mixed at all with stocked fish, that has been right off the side of a road. There's a neighborhood right there. Again, to me, was just really exciting and really cool to show the resiliency of these fish. And so with this information, we've continued to sample within 2020 and 2021. In pardon my maybe dark humor, in 2020, suddenly our ability to get genetic sampling and analysis supplies completely vanished, because obviously there was some other research going on in terms of genetics. We did connect to all of our samples and continue to search. And finally, we've been able to get those materials back in supply and are currently running our samples now. The only other thing to mention before I talk about the one last thing that Trout Power is currently doing is that, one thing that we're really excited about is that we were indirectly involved in some of the discussions, well, directly and indirectly involved in the management plan discussions around the new inland trout stream management plan that the DC has recently put forth. And when I say indirectly and directly involved, Jordan, our former president and founder, was one of the members of the board that really, drafted and put this plan out there to the public. And Jordan's main piece in this, with a few others, was really pushing the idea that we should start to designate streams and manage streams as either being wild trout streams or stocked trout streams. I'm quite jealous of that because here in Vermont, they do not do that. One of my favorite streams about an hour south of here, where there are some gorgeous wild rainbows, certainly not the steelhead that you all are catching down there in terms of size, but it's a wild rainbow trout population. And every year Vermont Fish and Wildlife goes in and dumps upwards of 1,000 brown trout right on top of them. And I love brown trout just as much as the next person, but if we've got a stream that holds a wild population of rainbows, then I kind of feel like maybe we can go and find somewhere else to put the stock browns. Again, that's my personal opinion, but so we were indirectly involved in that, and obviously sent in our public comment letters supporting the now implemented idea that we're going to manage streams as either being stocked or wild, and obviously with various exceptions, for certain fisheries. But that's one thing that I guess if there's something I can point that our studies have led to, other than saying we found genetically unique fish, it's been that. It's been the fact that I think the DC has told us, whether they're making us feel good or being honest, that our work and finding these fish has made them recognize, okay, so if we're stocking over wild brook trout, we might be stocking over a heritage strain, and we don't want to do that. These fish have potentially been there for 10,000 years. Why don't we just let them be? So the very last piece here, and I appreciate everyone's attention, and hopefully you've kind of found this interesting, because I find it fascinating as a science fisherman. What we started to do now is we started to look at a couple of our populations in some Adirondack watersheds, and looking more not just at the fish, but looking at the fish and their environmental conditions. So we have a few long-term studies. We have one that's been ongoing for a few years, one that we're about to start, and one that we're going to start next year, where every year we're going in and we're taking genetic samples of brook trout within those watersheds. We identify sections in our research plan, and we need at least 20 samples from each section of the watershed to get that statistical significance. We are collecting water samples at various locations that are specifically found. We're going in and we have these temperature loggers that we're also placing with permits in different reaches of the watershed, and also monitoring air temperature as well. The goal with this is that we are trying to find, as we do these long-term studies, what is happening within the watershed in terms of water temperature, water chemistry, and then specifically Michigan State, where we send our samples, they have recently begun and are undergoing a study that is really looking at how are brook trout adapting to thermal change, temperature change at the genetic level. And again, as we see these streams warming, one of the streams that we sample, I took a temperature reading of 79.6 degrees last July, which certainly didn't make me feel good, and I'm sure definitely didn't make the brook trout feel good. So we're trying to see how are these fish going to adapt over time to the changing temperatures. And again, obviously that's lumped in with climate change and global warming, but also we're also interested in seeing, what happens when we have drought years, what happens when we have years of excessive rain and flooding. Thinking about the last 4 or 5 years, as you all know, we've had some interesting weather, to say the least. So we're trying to look, again, using temperature loggers, which you can see here. We use what we call hobo loggers. We preset these, we put them in certain casing to protect them. We stake them into the ground where we have permits. That's actually me down there doing that. I guess that's an action shot for you, if you will. And we place those, and then we switch those out every April and then every October, especially in case we have any issues with, losing the loggers. Fortunately, we've only lost 1 or 2 over the years, but so that's the one other thing that we're doing, is starting to do these long-term studies. And again, we will do these for well over 10 years. And the biggest thing that we need, per scientists from the DEC and other organizations' recommendation, is we really need a couple big weather events, whether they're excessive droughts, which sounds weird. It sounds like I'm almost hoping for those. I'm not, but in terms of the science, we're really hoping to see how are these fish responding to these weather events. And side note, we're doing this on streams that we found these heritage strain fish. These fish have been there for upwards of potentially 10,000 years. So they know what they're doing. So we want to see how they're doing it at a genetic level. And again, we don't have any results. These studies are, again, like I said, year 3, year 1, and then another one starting next year. So that's kind of the last thing where we've taken our genetic analysis and really kind of taking it to that next level. I think in our organization, we're still in our infancy. I kind of call ourselves a teenager organization, late teens, but we're really trying to ramp up what we're doing, and the importance of, not just saying, hey, we found a fish that's unique, but really making that matter even more. So as kind of a final wrap-up point, and then I'll certainly take any questions if anyone has any. The cool thing about this organization to me is just how passionate people are about this. If you're a stream fisherman or a river fisherman, I think you probably share that same passion as I do. We have volunteers who, a striking example is to me is that in 2019, we had 3 guys come up from New Jersey who were actually scheduled to float a branch of the Delaware. And they canceled their float on the Delaware to come up to an area that we had never sampled. So we didn't even know if we were going to catch fish. And I thought that was pretty striking, that they went from saying no to catching some of those bullet rainbows that are down there that are a ton of fun, and coming up just on the whim of maybe catching some small brook trout. And, again, it's so exciting for us to go out and catch some absolutely beautiful fish. All of these pictures are of unique strain brook trout. And note also that the bags also make a kind of a quick and easy way to keep the fish wet, but also get kind of a cool picture, at least I think. So it's fun to go back there. It's fun to catch these fish. It's fun to see that shared passion. We have people who come in who don't know anyone, and then by the end of it, we feel like close friends. And so it's great. And The one other thing, and the last thing I'll leave you with, is that, we go into these areas and we never know what we're going to find. We get excited when we catch these small brook trout. However, over the years since 2016, we have had a few of those days where we drop a streamer in or let down a caddis dry fly or something, and we find fish that aren't quite as small, such as this is a fish that my friend Mark caught in the Adirondacks a few years back. And and by the way, note the rod in his hand, which is a 6.5 foot 2 weight. So he had a whale of a time landing that fish on that rod. He was I don't think the smile came off his face for about a week after that. But it's really cool, and it's kind of the exploration of the unknown. So that's Trout Power. That's what we do. That's how we do it. If you have any interest in learning more about us, you can is our little slogan, we catch the power. It's kind of catchy, no pun intended. But our website is troutpower.org. We have an Instagram and a Facebook, and I think that's how we kind of got connected to this chapter of Trout Unlimited, was through Instagram. Our website's got information about us. We have a quarterly journal that we put out talking about what we're doing, where we're doing it, what we found, and obviously we're having an event. We're having events in June, actually at Great Camp Sagamore, as previously mentioned. We're going to continue. That's one of our long-term studies that we're doing, and we're able to have large public gatherings. I'm excited to hear that you all are about to go back to have a public meeting. So I'm very honored to be here at the hopefully last ever virtual meeting for this chapter. But we invite people to come up. We have people coming from all over, whether it's New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York. We have a lot of regional people who are coming in and helping us. And so we're doing an event in June. We're going to do another event in the fall. So follow us, check out our website, and obviously we would invite anyone and everyone to come and join us. And we love having new people come aboard. And if there's one picture that can kind of summarize Trout Power, especially for me selfishly, that's my father. That's a pretty impressive brook trout for the streams we fish. And we had sampled that fish, and he was just about to release it, and I said, "Hey, Dad, give us a smile there." So it's a picture that kind of encompasses the fun of fishing and citizen science and Trout Power. So that's Trout Power. That is take my screen down, and that's what we do and how we do it. And so if anyone has any questions or anything like that, I'd certainly love to answer them. If you're sitting here and saying, "Boy, that was a lot," and it's 8:15 and I'm a little tired, now you know how my high school students feel. So again, thank you so much for your attention and for your time, and any questions I'd certainly take if anyone has any.
Yeah, Chris, do you guys ever, I know you're doing the sampling kind of it sounds like large gatherings, but is there an opportunity for people, if they're just going to the Adirondacks for a weekend, to do some sampling also and get that to you guys, or no?
So we do. If we have that happen. We have the small group missions where we will have missions of which we've really relied on for the past 2 years, Kyle. We've tried to keep it less than 10 people. Obviously, just with this COVID factor, we're really excited to have large gatherings, but we do have small gatherings. In terms of independent people going up there, if we have a way that we can have one of our Trout Power representatives, meet up with them, train them, and get them the necessary materials, we're certainly interested. The one thing that we ask is we kind of ask for a reason, if you will. And not just, especially because one thing I did mention is that this analysis is expensive. So from cradle to grave, it costs us about $100 a fin clip to sample a fish. So it is an expensive process. We rely on, just similar to you guys, we rely on donations and grant funding. So the reasoning is kind of, we've had people say, "Hey, this is my favorite stream. I want to see if they're heritage strain." And when we check the stocking records and see, a lot of stock brook trout, we kind of say, "Hey, not to dwell your excitement, but we don't really see a great reason to sample up there." But if someone has an idea for an area, then absolutely, we're certainly willing to converse, and we're always, our mission is to find these fish and identify them. So when people say, hey, I've got an area that, you should check out, and I want to check it out with you, then we are always happy to entertain those calls and start a discourse about it. And it's led us to one of the streams we've identified has started with that right there, just a phone call or an email. Hey, you might want to check this area out. It's like, okay, cool. Well, come and join us. So yes. Long story made short, yes.
A quick follow-up to that is you mentioned to receive training from you guys.
Yes.
If someone showed up at your June gathering, would there be training there or?
Absolutely. Yes. We're gonna do training. We've had people already sign up. We're going to, we'll probably cap the event at about 40 people. But we still certainly have open spaces. So if people have interest, again, we certainly welcome that. We're going to stay right at the Great Camp, which is fantastic. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And so, yes, any event that we have, we always train people. Always. Absolutely. Absolutely, we do. For sure. So, and I see some other questions coming into the chat here. Well, all right. Thank you, Lance. I appreciate that. Okay. So sampling streams. So we have in Western New York personally, we have not moved outside the Adirondacks yet. Now, that does not mean that we are not going to. We have focused so far on the Adirondacks, partially because of the remoteness. I'm originally from Syracuse and spent most of my weekends in the Adirondacks. It's an area that I'm familiar with, and if you're familiar with them as well, there's a lot of wild area and wild streams. So we have a lot of places that we can go. However, as I mentioned before, if in Western New York, people think, hey, I think this is somewhere we should check out, and here's why. We are, certainly interested. And if there are people around, volunteers, maybe people in this chapter here who think, hey, we've got a couple streams where there might be these unique fish, that's certainly something that we would love to talk about and, potentially organize and work to, like I said, like we did with Tug Hill, that's exactly how it happened. The chapter reached out and said, hey, we've got a few streams here that we think are, pretty promising. We trained them. We worked on, funding together and we're able to identify that fish. So that's, we are looking to expand for sure. Again, if we're given that reason. And then I love the second question. How do you get 15 miles back? You walk. And that's why I ride my little exercise bike every day. I don't care how I look or care about my shape until I'm walking with a backpack and a fly rod tube. And about mile 7, I go, oh boy, should have rode the bike a little bit more in the off season. So we're boots on the ground, and some areas that we paddle, but a lot of our streams you wouldn't make it very far in a canoe or a hornbeck. So that's a lot of hiking, a lot of exploring, which is really fun. So great questions.
Hey, Chris, sorry, one question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, indeed. Yes, go ahead, Cal.
First of all, that was just an awesome presentation. That was really cool, informative, and entertaining. So thanks for doing that.
Tell that to my students. Eh?
I was just it's different. If I was like a 14-year-old boy, I think I would have been checked out about a half hour ago, but I'm an old man now, so I enjoy this kind of thing.
There you go.
I was curious if there was any consideration in changing the stocking regime for the lakes in the Adirondacks. If you guys are seeing hybridization from fish leaving the lakes into the streams, if there has ever been any talk about that, changing some of those practices.
So I think that, when we, in terms of my own personal perspective, as well as our organizational perspective, when we saw the release of that new inland trout stream management plan, again, we certainly celebrated the separation of streams into wild versus stocked, and then obviously the separate designations within those categories. In my letter, in my own personal letter to the DC, as well as our organizational one, we certainly advocated for what we call more of a watershed model of management. So if we are finding wild fish in streams that are connecting to lakes that are stocked, then trying to identify again and using some of our data that we have showing that hybridization, that we maybe think about shifting management to a fully wild managed watershed. The DC certainly listened to that. Their answer was understandably that that is in terms of our levels of change, that is a very large jump, a jump that they were unwilling to make now, one that they were certainly willing to think about, and one thing that we haven't fully planned out, but one thing that we've talked about with the DEC is finding a specific lake where we've actually pinpointed a few, where we have a lake that we know is stocked with brook trout, and then we found a stream that has wild fish, and basically having the DEC agree to stop stocking the lake, and then doing a case study where we can see over time, it would obviously be a longitudinal study, seeing how that changes the genetics within the fish, in that, whether it's an inlet or outlet, and seeing how that changes. So, and the DEC certainly said that kind of research and that evidence, showing that actually makes a difference, I think that they thought would give them much more reason to consider that. So I certainly advocate for it, and as we've seen, that's an issue. And I've actually seen situations where we've seen law, especially as you guys know, these fish run out of the lakes. So you guys are in the primo spot for fish running out of lakes. So what am I talking about? And we see some big brook trout come out of these lakes that I'm sure are coming up and probably disturbing some of our wild heritage fish. So it's something that we're certainly aiming for and will continue to advocate for as time moves forward. Yeah, so that's a great question. Absolutely. So yes, yes, indeed. I appreciate that point about the students being volunteers. Yes, if they were volunteers, I'm not sure if I'd have a job some days, but that's a very good point. So, and obviously I appreciate all you being volunteers for Trout Unlimited, and that's fantastic. So any other questions?
Yeah, I just had one more. When you were showing all of the line charts or whatever they were about
Yes.
the genetic analysis.
Certainly.
So the unique strains you guys were finding, there was obviously some slivers of overlap. So is that indicating for sure that those are hybridized with the stock, or is it just showing that they might have a similar lineage further back?
Great question. So there is, and Kyle, that's an awesome question. There is one of our few limiting factors of microsat analysis, is that with that level of genetic analysis, we're not able with complete confidence to answer that question. If we see more than just a trace amount, you saw in some of those fish, and even within the heritage strains themselves that have been identified, such as in Windfall Pond or Horn Lake, you see just that little trace. Knowing that those are isolated, Horn Lake and Windfall, knowing those are isolated still water populations, my hypothesis, not confirmed, my hypothesis is that there's a similar microsatellite signature there. With this new RAD sequencing technique, we'll be able to answer that question, which we're really excited about. When we see those much larger amounts of crossover, then we're seeing hybridization. There wouldn't be, those populations aren't going to have, especially when they're unique, wouldn't have that large a scale of crossover if they're heritage strain. But when you see those little like trace amounts, either hypothesis you could support with science, either hybridization or just a couple microsat signatures that have been the same within those fish. So it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer. I will hopefully in about 3 weeks. So indeed. So any other questions from the field here? Wonderful. All right. Well, like I said, and I'll certainly share. I'm happy to share. Like I said, I've shared the website and the Instagram, Trout Power, and the Facebook. I'll send that to Kyle and Chris. So if anyone wants to get our contact info, it's troutpower.org. And on troutpower.org, the one thing I was going to show is we have a little, kind of video, 3-minute, 4-minute video that kind of shows a synopsis of what we do. And unfortunately, if anyone's experienced showing videos on these Zooms, Google Meets, sometimes they're choppy and not so excellent. So that's on our website. Certainly invite you to check that out. And if you have any more questions, please, reach out to me. If you want to reach out to me through Kyle or Chris, I certainly invite that. And we have information on our website about that June event. And like I said, we'll have more events in the fall. Some events we stay at lodges like in June. Some events are just the good old, bring your tent, bring your cooler, bring your truck or car, and let's go camping. So we do a wide variety of things. And obviously we would welcome any and all volunteers, and would certainly entertain any questions or comments that anyone has. So please reach out to us anytime. And especially if you've got any ideas out in the region that you're at, or if you just want to give me a really great steelhead spot as a thank you for this, I wouldn't complain about that, so whatever you want. But please reach out anytime, and thank you guys all for your time and your attention. And it's been a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. That was awesome. Really encouraging. So, all right. Well, guys, we'll just wrap the meeting up. Again, we're meeting in person next month. Don't forget about the Fly Fishing Film Festival, April 9th. Get online, buy those tickets. If you want to buy raffle items or raffle tickets for the premium items, you can do that at Orvis now. Or if not now, sometime this week, I believe. So, even if you're not going to go to the festival itself, you can get involved in the premier raffle, see if you win one of those sweet prizes. But we'll call it a meeting. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you next month in person.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.